Ijevsk is an industrial city of about 500,000 people in Russia's Volga region. It doesn't have a reputation as a place with a vibrant cultural life. In fact, it's known for being the heart of Russia's arms manufacturing industry. This was where the AK-47 was invented. However, at the far end of a small square in the city center, there is a modern building of glass and wood, and through its large windows, you can see rows of bookshelves. This is Ijevsk's only independent bookshop. It was founded in 2021 by husband and wife team German and Ksenia. There is nothing particularly surprising about the books they have for sale, but the number of books available to buyers has been shrinking in recent years because of growing censorship.
The current trend is that very slowly, but at an accelerating pace, the shelves in bookshops are emptying. There's much less than there was 10, 5, even just 1 year ago.
Books disappear quietly. Sometimes booksellers remove books themselves to avoid being targeted by the authorities or denounced by customers. Sometimes publishers recall entire print runs. Usually, the vanished titles are those that tackle topics considered to be unacceptable by the Russian authorities, like books exploring LGBTQ+ issues. But it's also harder and harder to find books by writers who oppose President Vladimir Putin's regime. Booksellers who stalk authors designated as extremists or terrorists by the authorities can be jailed. And writers in this category are not marginal figures. For instance, they include novelist Boris Akunin, whose detective books have sold more than 30 million copies. A fierce critic of Putin, Akunin has lived outside Russia for many years.
Even before I knew which law might ban me or fine me for selling Akunin's books, I removed them right away. I thought, why would I stick my hand into a bear's mouth and tell myself, like, well, it's a trained bear, so it won't hurt me.
Then there are the Russian authors that the government has labeled foreign agents, a catch-all term designed to discredit Putin's opponents. Until recently, their books have to have a warning label on the cover, like you'd see on a pack of cigarettes. It was German's job to check that the warning was in place before the books went onto the shelves and ensure the books were sealed in plastic.
Sometimes we rub them ourselves. Sometimes the publisher puts a sticker right on the cover, making it clear. Then we just have to put it in the bag, or at least not to break the factory wrapping.
However, a new law came into force on September 1st, 2025, after we spoke to German, which completely banned the sale of books by so-called foreign agents.
Starting September 1st, it will be completely illegal to sell books by foreign agents in Russia. Not in shrink wrap, not in craft paper, not under the table, nothing.
Hello, and welcome to Russia Underground. I'm Nina Berezna, a political researcher and Russian citizen.
And I'm Howard Amos, a journalist who reported from Russia for nearly a decade. This is the last episode of the second mini-series of our podcast. Over 3 episodes, we've been exploring what we've called the fight against forgetting, what's being erased, how are ordinary people resisting, and what can be learnt from Russia's experience.
In this episode, we will trace how Russia's book market has been reshaped by repression. How has life changed for publishers and independent bookshops? What does it mean for readers when familiar titles disappear? Is there a new scope for resistance? Like in previous episodes, we have changed the names and some of the details of our interviewees for security reasons.
To understand how censorship is changing the book industry, we spoke with Victoria Artemyeva, a cultural journalist who lives and works in Russia.
It all started on 24th of February when all our country got up in the morning and realized that even our language is different now because there are some words that we can't pronounce.
She means the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
The war, we must call it special military operation, and if we call it war, we can even be sentenced to prison. So even our language is changed.
But language was only the beginning.
In November 2022, the most important book censorship law was signed, and it was the law prohibiting LGBT propaganda. And another law in this year was the law of 2023.
She's referring to a law targeting the LGBTQ plus community in 2022, and a ruling the following year by Russia's Supreme Court designating the, quote, international LGBT movement, unquote, as an extremist organization.
Because of those laws, both of which were extremely vague, lots of books were withdrawn from sale and from libraries, and some authors and some publishers were made to flee Russia, and so on.
But this is not just about targeting the LGBTQ plus community.
The most important and primary targets are books written by people who are against the war, are against the regime, are against Putin.
Apart from Akunin, famous names that have seen their books disappear from the shelves of Russian bookshops in recent years include poet Dmitry Bykov, science fiction writer Dmitry Glukhovsky, novelist Lyudmila Ulitskaya, and non-fiction authors Alexander Genis and Alexander Akhangelsky. After the start of the war, the Russian authorities increasingly targeted bookshops and small publishers, raiding venues and seizing books. But things got dramatically worse in 2025. In May, security officers raided a small independent bookshop called Karta Mira in the Siberian city of Novosibirsk. It was the first time law enforcement had turned its attention to a bookshop outside Moscow or St. Petersburg. Later the same day, it emerged that about 10 current and former employees of publishers Individuum and Popcorn Books had been detained. The raids were no longer just about books on shelves. They were about people. Eventually, 3 of the detainees were named as criminal suspects. The executive director of Individuum and Popcorn Books, a former sales director, and a warehouse manager. Individuum and Popcorn Books are not niche indie publishers. They are imprints of Exmoor, Russia's largest publishing house, which prints about 80 million books a year. The message was clear. No one would escape the state's crackdown.
Это самое неприятное, что может произойти.
The most unpleasant thing that can happen is when the blows don't fall on you, on the people who made the decisions with you, but on those who can't defend themselves. Hitting people like warehouse staff, that's just wrong.
Это некрасиво.
That's Irina. She's the founder of an independent Russian publishing house, which has operated since the early 2000s. She requested we not identify the publishing house. State investigators looking into Individuum and Popcorn Books, what has come to be called the publisher's case, seem to be targeting Exmoor because it published the now infamous bestseller Pioneer Summer, a book about a gay love affair in 1986. Written by Ukrainian-Russian duo Katerina Silvanova and Yelena Malisova, the book has become a red flag for Russian officials. Not only does it focus on LGBTQ plus themes, it also reframes memories of the Soviet Union and was wildly popular among young people. Some also believe that the publisher's case is linked to an influential politician we met in a previous episode, Vladimir Medinsky, presidential aide, former culture minister, extreme nationalist, and author of new patriotic history textbooks used in Russian schools. In January, Medinsky was made head of the Union of Writers of Russia, an agency that's becoming the gatekeeper of what can be published, sold, or read. For publishers and booksellers, the direction of travel looks to be clear. Censorship is becoming less chaotic and less ad hoc. With Medinsky setting the agenda, it will be centralized and ideological. For the moment, though, no one is sure who the police might target next.
Мы не совсем понимаем, чего ждать.
We don't fully understand what to expect from this so-called publisher's case. Is it an attempt at commercial carve-up of the market? An ideological crackdown? We don't know if something else will follow.
We made several attempts to interview independent bookshops owners for this episode, but at least 3 declined. One bookshop closed down just as we were seeking an interview. Izhevsk bookshop owner German thinks it's only a matter of time before he is targeted.
Sooner or later, I'll be facing federal extremism unit, not a tax inspection or a copyright check by the Russian Author Society. Maybe I'll be given a big fine. Just a fine would be enough to put an end to this shop, because I couldn't pay it and I just have to close down.
Irina described a similar dark mood in publishing.
Мы всегда были не очень бизнесовым издательством.
We were never a very business-oriented publishing house. We were more about ideas, about freedom of speech and so on. And while that was still fashionable, everything worked out fine. But over time, it has stopped working so well. Now it is clear that we are here living off the reputation we've built over more than 20 years of work. And we are quite surprised that we haven't received any kind of quote-unquote honorary recognition so far.
As we saw with history teachers in schools, often the trigger for police raids on a bookshop or fine for a publisher is an anonymous denunciation. It's a sinister relic of Stalinist times. Irina recounted how her publishing house was recently denounced by someone who sent a complaint both to the Prosecutor General's office and personally to Medinsky. The snitch highlighted a mistake with one of the Second World War casualty figures in a book they had published. It was, according to Irina, a genuine error. Fortunately, there were no official repercussions, but the warning was clear. Even mistakes can be weaponized.
As we've seen elsewhere, there's little overt resistance to expanding censorship in the Russian book industry. What resistance there is subtle, quiet, and designed to fly under the radar. Take, for example, an Italian biography of filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini, translated and published in Russia in 2024. Instead of making edits to the text so as not to fall foul of Russia's anti-LGBT laws, the publishing house decided to black out sections about the Italian filmmaker's sexuality on the page. The result only highlighted censorship. One media outlet mocked the decision by publishing a review that also had sections blacked out, and readers immediately turned to the internet to find the uncensored text. In another example, there have been instances of publishers suddenly deciding to release a series of books about life in Nazi Germany. Is this just a coincidence, or is the publisher deliberately drawing parallels with the current regime in Russia? For many readers, just continuing to read and discuss books is a form of resistance.
Book clubbing is one of the most important things to do right now. If the Russian person who opposes the war wants to do something, I think a book club would be the great start because it creates community.
This is Sergei Lebedenko, a book blogger and writer. He also runs an online book club called Book and Grill. Although he left Russia at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, many members of the book club are still inside the country. In total, the group has about 100 participants. All are anti-war, though not necessarily activists. To help protect identities, newcomers have to be invited, discussions are no longer recorded on Zoom and uploaded to YouTube, and Sergei periodically purges the group of those who are not actively contributing.
I think people just need some sense of community right now, because especially in Russia, because you don't know who you want to trust. You have your close friends, you have your colleagues maybe, and that's it. And you want someone to trust, to share your book reading, especially if you read something prohibited by the state.
The group's founding principle was simple: no censorship. In recent years, they have read banned books. For example, they discussed a book on homosexuality in the Soviet Union, published by Individuum, the same publishing house whose staff are currently facing criminal prosecution. One of the club's largest gatherings was to discuss I Love Russia, a book by journalist Yelena Kostychenko, who spent the first months of the war reporting from Ukraine. Her book, which was published abroad, not inside Russia, explores issues like harassment, police abuse, women's rights, and life as a queer person in Russia. Sergei said that it was a rare session in which people tended to share anecdotes from their own lives, rather than critiquing the book itself.
This was the discussion that mostly was centered around the book and not on the book, and I think it's okay, because if there are some questions the book raised and you remember something from your own life, it's as good as if you discuss the contents of the book itself.
At a book club meeting about Human Acts by South Korean writer Han Kang, which explores the crushing of opposition demonstrations, talk turned to how Putin had suppressed opposition protests in Russia. and there was a heated debate about survival strategies after the group read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which recounts the author's time in a Nazi camp. For some, Frankl's message that hope is what keeps people alive was a source of strength amid the war in Ukraine and exile. Others argued it was unfair to suggest those who had lost hope were somehow at fault. The debate split along generation and political lines, showing how a book could aggravate open wounds.
I think because each one of us have our different strategies of coping with the life right now. Some people need their hope and they need bright things to brighten their day, and they don't read news, for example, because they know they have their stance, they are anti-war, but it is enough for them. Other people, they read the news just to keep up with all the horrors and to document everything, just to look behind in the future and understand how we come to these horrors right now.
Like Sergei, Aksiniya is also a member of a reading group of people both in Russia and abroad. Like Sergei's club, Aksiniya's club started during the pandemic and meets online. And, also like Sergei's club, it has become more than simply a forum to discuss books. It's also a lifeline, an opportunity to speak freely, and a place to find like-minded people. According to Aksiniya, people feel they can discuss almost any topic.
It feels like a safe space, as safe as one can be in our circumstances.
The group votes on what to read. Early in the war, they gravitated towards pacifist literature. Recently, the focus shifted to books that somehow address how to live in a wartime reality, how to understand the world, and how to endure uncertainty. Their last book club meeting was about Gulag memoir Into the Whirlwind by Yevgeny Ginzburg, who spent many years in the Gulag system. Many participants of the book club correspond with Russian political prisoners today, and there was a lot in common between the gulags described in Into the Whirlwind and the country's modern prison system.
Since we follow the stories of political prisoners, we compared what they write in their letters now with what Ginsburg described in her book, finding parallel experiences that resonate. Of course, living conditions have changed. I chose this book because I saw that political prisoners were reading it too. I couldn't help recalling stories from their letters. In prison, finding close human connections is crucial as much as possible. The value of a person remains the same.
When we spoke to Aksiniya, she said that their next session was to be about a book called Cadavers by contemporary Russian writer Alexei Polyarinov. A dystopian novel, Cadavers is clearly inspired by Russia's present-day scourges of war and political repression.
It's a post-apocalyptic world in which the frozen figures of dead children are appearing all over the country.
Both Sergei and Aksiniya's groups show how reading has become a form of resistance, expressed through shared stories, collective reflection, and community. Yet, even this refuge is under threat.
Readers are not yet persecuted criminally in Russia. They may be, since 1st of September 2025.
Sergei is referring to another law that came into force on the 1st of September that stipulates fines for those who deliberately search for extremist material online. Russia's official list of extremist material runs to hundreds of pages, mixing publications by banned organizations like the Anti-Corruption Foundation, founded by the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny, with books, essays, images, and songs. Some entries are so vaguely defined they could mean almost anything. Many believe this lack of definition is the point. The simple act of searching for a censored book could be classified as a crime. Yet still, people read.
Cultural journalist Victoria, who we heard from at the beginning of the episode, explains that writers in modern Russia fall into three categories. The first group are those who actively embrace the official narrative. They eagerly write about the war and produce content that aligns with government messaging. Perhaps the most famous of this is novelist Zakhar Prilepin. The second larger group is made up of authors who simply want to survive. They aim to continue writing, earn a living, and avoid getting into trouble. They sidestep topics that might be considered sensitive or politically risky. The third group is dissidents, writers who refuse to compromise, even when under immense pressure. Some publish their work abroad, often anonymously or under pseudonyms, while a few still manage to get their books released in Russia, though this is now very rare. Such a division reminds many of the Soviet Union. Publisher Irina believes even how Russian writers are using language has changed under the constraints of censorship.
Not everyone has yet learned to speak in the Aesopian language that the Soviet generation of prose writers, and to a lesser extent poets, mastered so brilliantly. But we are moving in that direction, and soon everyone will be able to perfectly convey all the meaning they want.
Of course, one of the reasons why writers have begun to resemble their Soviet counterparts is because they are reacting to the way in which Russian officials approach censorship today, which increasingly resembles Soviet-era practices.
Our censorship now is absolutely Sovietic. All these canceling events, banning authors and paper books and something like this is very out of time. And our lawmakers just forget that we live not in Soviet period, but we live in the internet era and the era of total online, at least for now. So finally, all the censorship measures are like weak dam, which is being built on the Niagara waterfall, I would say.
In response, there has been a modern-day revival of Soviet dissident traditions. Firstly, samizdat, the publication of banned literature abroad. The word is a play on samizdat and literally means published over there. After 2022, many publishers, authors, and even distributors left Russia and founded publishing houses abroad. The books they produce are not just for emigre Russians. Many still find their way back to readers in Russia via PDFs, online orders, or friends physically bringing copies across the border. It's a way of preserving a shared cultural space despite physical separation. Secondly, the more familiar samizdat, the clandestine copying and distribution of banned literature inside Russia, is also making a comeback.
There are some small and independent publishing houses which I don't want to mention and to name, not to endanger them and not to compromise them. But there are some who stay strong, who resist.
As bookclub Sergei points out, samizdat today is no longer just a publishing project. Readers themselves find ways to circulate forbidden texts.
As of now, readers are still reading banned books in Russia. They just found ways to do it. They read stuff electronically. They can buy books from eBay analogs on Avito and so on. Some books are printed, like old school in Soviet Union. But yeah, mostly electronically. And it's safer because with the phone right now, you don't have the policeman coming to you and speaking, oh, you're reading a book there. What book is about? And so on. There's no such thing right now in Russia. Yet.
Piracy in Russia, long a challenge for publishers, has become rampant since the beginning of the war. Banned books appear on online marketplaces like Avito, the Russian equivalent of eBay, under disguised titles or false author names. Some people even put printed bootlegs or banned works up for sale.
You even can sell some books by so-called extremist writers. You just put another name, you put another headline and so on, but everyone knows what you're talking about and everyone buys what she wants.
This blurred space between samizdat and piracy underlines the improvisation at the heart of cultural survival in Russia today. The digital age gives readers plenty of tools to outfox the censors, at least for now.
Despite all the pressure, there is no evidence that Russians are turning away from books. In fact, the very opposite might be true. Irina, the publisher, described how her publishing house remains commercially successful.
What surprised me is how many people in Russia trust our reputation and buy our books. Not just the hits, but new, completely unexpected books that we can no longer promote as much as before, because there is no longer the space for open discussion. I always thought that people needed us, and I still think that.
For Irina, this highlights what matters most: quality, not quantity. Irina says that her publishing house will continue to operate within the law, not out of loyalty to the state, but to ensure that readers in Russia still have access to meaningful, high-quality literature. But she acknowledges that there are limits to this approach. If publishers are too risk-shy or the censorship gets too powerful, Russian literature risks becoming hollowed out, and readers could end up losing trust in books.
Мы еще и потеряем книгу как инструмент.
We risk losing the book as a tool, something to which people turn if not for truth, then at least for wisdom, or just to feel that they are not alone, that they are not the only ones going through what they are going through.
Like Irina, bookshop owner German is determined to try and keep working in Russia, and he's prepared to make the compromises this entails.
I'm more of a conformist. I want to continue living in my city and in comfort, even if that means sacrificing the ability to pursue my favorite work.
At the same time, he believes the picture is not all bleak. For one, new, independent bookshops keep opening.
About 30 new stores have opened nationwide, small independent bookshops. People come, they read, they give lectures. It's absurd and strange, but it's happening.
For another, more and more people are visiting German's bookshop. It has become something of an unspoken gathering point, not for revolutionaries or even activists, but for those who are, albeit silently, opposed to the regime and the war.
Every year, our audience gradually grows. People who have been buying books from us for years come back. They tell us how important it is, how meaningful it is, and how nice it is to gather here to be around thoughtful people. I really like the way someone put it once. It's all about having the opportunity to find other decent people who you can look in the eye. I believe our role in today's Russia, at least in Izhevsk from what I see, is to preserve the feeling that life continues.
German's philosophy brings us full circle. Resistance in Russia today does not always look like defiance on a grand scale. More often than not, it is a fragile balance between persistence and survival, between speaking out and finding a way to avoid having your life upended.
When open protest is impossible, opposition takes other forms. It becomes a series of gestures that rarely make headlines, yet quietly reshape everyday life. In Russia, these gestures include reading banned books or taking part in book clubs, where people discover not only great works of literature, but a community of like-minded individuals. These gestures help preserve the idea that a book can be more than a commodity, that a book can be a refuge, a way to say what cannot otherwise be said, and a sign that cultural life is not defined by orders from above.
You've been listening to the Russia Underground podcast. That was the final episode of our mini-series about the fight against forgetting. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave us a comment or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and please share the podcast with a friend or colleague who might be interested. We appreciate your support. I'm Howard Amos.
And I'm Nina Berezna. Thanks for listening.